When Metroid Prime 4 Beyond was officially released in 2025, people soon started talking about certain aspects of its aesthetics. Many saw strong yonic imagery in its archways, doors, and elevators. But the symbolism of woman and femininity goes beyond a subliminal door design. It seems this game has a rather complicated, even ambivalent relationship with womanhood. So let us take a look at femininity in Fury Green. Disclaimer. First, I am not a woman, and there are inevitably perspectives on this subject I am simply not positioned to see. If something feels misrepresented or incomplete, I would welcome that feedback in the comments. Second, womanhood is not reducible to reproductive biology, and not every woman possesses the anatomy this analysis repeatedly references. Also, not every person with that anatomy identifies as feminine. Femininity, as used here, refers to a broad, culturally coded symbolic register, not a biological definition, and not a reduction of womanhood to reproduction. Viros evokes sensual, even sexual connotations from the moment the player awakes as Samus Aran in the foreboding Chrono Tower. The game so heavily inundates the player with yonic symbolism that it can scarcely be considered unintentional. The coloring at Chrono Tower even features tones that meander between skin, flesh, and tissue. It seems an impossible task to walk through these corridors and not think of reproductive organs. Once you start looking, you see it everywhere. Even Samus herself gets one such symbol embedded in her suit the moment she receives the psychic crystal. But what exactly is yonic imagery? Yoni is the abstract depiction of the Hindu goddess Shakti, typically shown as a vulva-shaped form representing creation and generative power. Yonic, then, simply describes any imagery that echoes that shape, the counterpart to the far more familiar term phallic. This visual language follows the player across every biome in the game, but one area in particular hammers that connotation home with almost unyielding persistence. Leaving Chrono Tower, Samus slides through a canal and is birthed into the next area, appearing mid-air in an embryonic position. This lush green, moist brown jungle announces itself as the Fury Green, even though the developers probably wanted to allude to a wild, untamed plant life. The word fury traces back to a Greek myth known as the Erinyes, later recontextualized as the Furies in ancient Rome. These are women, goddesses even, embodying endless anger, jealous rage, and vengeful destruction. By name alone, this area puts femininity already in a specific connotation: furious, angry, intimidating. Fury Green is littered with vulvic shapes. Everywhere you look, you see different sizes, colors, and forms. The area aggressively places femininity right next to nature. But why is that? Sherry B. Ortner writes, among other things, because of woman's greater bodily involvement with the natural functions surrounding reproduction, she is seen as more part of nature than man is. Ortner argues that nature is devalued and society ties women to nature through the body and reproduction. She aligns with Simone de Beauvoir and states that a lot of a woman's body space is reserved for reproduction and to some extent irrelevant for or detrimental to her own survival. Breasts could be excised at any time, and menstruation ignites discomfort. The consequence, then, is that this heightened bodily entanglement with reproduction positions woman as inherently closer to nature, while man remains freer to occupy the domains of intellect and culture. A framing de Beauvoir herself interrogates rather than endorses. We see this represented in Fury Green, where all the temples and remnants of Lamorne culture are carefully crafted with vulvic, organic and floral shapes. Architecture that does not just sit next to nature. Fury Green carries the highest concentration and greatest variety of these symbols of any biome in the game, and it is also the one most conventionally coded as nature, a dense jungle, giant trees and overgrown plant life. Compared to the game's other biomes, largely defined by factories, drilling rigs, and laboratories, we can argue that Metroid Prime 4 equates femininity with nature, or at the very least implies a very close relationship between the two. Science and technology, on the other hand, seem to be rather bolted onto nature and male-coded, with machines and cables looking almost crude between the beautiful and organic forms of the Lamorne ritual sites. Out of all the different hyper-technologized, futuristic means of transportation, the developers chose a giant phallic cannon that literally shoots Samus through the atmosphere into a different area of this world. Miles, who is a male representation of technology, apparently is unable to even see any of Samus' psychic abilities, stating that doors open all by themselves and remains at base camp, occupied with the machines. Samus, on the other hand, a skilled warrior operating a suit of advanced alien tech armor, is shown in need of a man's technical assistance to upgrade her own weapon, despite being the one who retrieved the Lamorne data to begin with.
Now that is a view.
When reaching the Temple of Memory, Samus is offered, or rather asked, to obtain the memory fruit from the sacred tree, a biological container of the Lamorne's wisdom and history. This can be interpreted as a positive reading of the original sin. While Eve illicitly takes the fruit of knowledge, tempted by the serpent, and is cast out of paradise, punished among other things with the pain of childbirth, Samus is instead tasked with obtaining the fruit of knowledge herself, and rather than being exiled from paradise, she's asked to leave it voluntarily, carrying the fruit with her to another world. The tale of original sin carries a lot of symbolism, but one thread that stands out is its framing of womanhood as failure. Eve's disobedient desire for knowledge is the reason for humanity's fall. In Metroid Prime 4, a woman's reach for the fruit is not the reason paradise is lost. It is the reason paradise might survive. Fury Green and its symbolism culminate in a boss fight against Carvex, a giant plant with a very interesting design. Carvex resembles a massive, thorn-covered flower, but at its center is a vertical slit lined with sharp, tooth-like protrusions, a direct visual representation of the vagina dentata, a myth found across cultures worldwide, later popularized in the West largely through Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic writing. The toothed genitalia is a powerful symbol of male anxiety around female sexuality and power, a fear that man will leave the encounter with less than he arrived with, a physical and psychological castration. Mircea Eliade writes in his book Myth and Reality the following: a great many myths feature an initiatory passage through a vagina dentata or the dangerous descent into a cave or crevice assimilated to the mouth or the uterus of Mother Earth. The victorious hero acquires a new mode of being. The parallels to Metroid Prime 4 are obvious. Samus gains a new ability and the world of Vuros opens up to the player. The similarities to this myth get even stronger when we look at an academic paper by Henrique Guilherme Scatolin titled The Myth of the Vagina Dentata: Archetypal Manifestations of the Terrible Mother. The vagina dentata carries out the function of the door to death or of the devouring mouth, symbols of devouring aggression and possession, all of which are characteristics of the negative sphere polarity of the female archetype. Interestingly, Carvex resides in the Garden of Remembrance, where it presided over Lamorne funerals, perfectly fulfilling the function of the door to death, while also resembling the dark, devouring half of a split between the nurturing and the destructive feminine. It all gets even more obvious when we change 2 letters of its name, swapping Carvex for cervix, the medical term for the lower, narrow end of the uterus. Across Fury Green, the developers built an environment that equates femininity with nature, while writing Samus, despite her own technical mastery, as dependent on Miles to upgrade her own weapons. And to progress past this biome, the player must defeat Carvex, a boss built directly from the myth of the vagina dentata. Samus must defeat femininity. Whether all this was done intentionally or subconsciously, I cannot tell. With the sheer accumulation of these symbols across the entire game, though, it seems unlikely this went entirely unnoticed and was nonetheless retained. In any case, even with a positive reading of the memory fruit as an inverted original sin, this representation of Samus might be the most reactionary depiction yet. This assumption is underlined by the game's rather regressive portrayal of femininity in Fury Green.